Welcome back everybody. In this video I'll be trying to illustrate how you can design games by using a paper prototype of a card game that I originally planned to make in GB Studio. So this game first began as a noughts and crosses based game where the player is either circle or X, and with the idea of a board, of a 3x3 grid, the aim of the game is obviously to get 3 in a row in some fashion. So with X's and O's, you can see that obviously there's numbers on them, and they each go from 1 to 5. And obviously they also have a size, and as you can see, the idea is, let's say we start with X, we put it in the middle. This number 1 can be covered by any value higher, so obviously a 5 could cover this, and then a 5 isn't coverable because you know, there's the 5's already down, right? So if I was to put this here, and then the X would come along and put that there, then obviously this 5 is being used now, so then there's an X forming. So obviously they would put down this 4, and it would create a block, and obviously they would try and come along with this 3 and block here. And as you can see, the idea is it's noughts and crosses, but with sizes which can be covered by higher numbers. And this was based off of I think like a plastic game that uses cups, and each cup like stacks. And I originally thought that I would make this into a card game in GB Studio. The game actually began as a collectathon game where they collect items like amber in the game, and then they would trade it into a museum like in Stardew Valley. But in this game you would get back a card with that item on, and each of those items has a different value which obviously correspond to this. So then I started thinking about how we could, you know, incorporate the images and what it would look like if we, instead of having X's and O's, had, for example, a leaf and amber, with the idea that amber, things encased in amber were on one side, and the things like organic and outside of amber were on the other. And so as you can see here, I thought of things like flowers, leaves, shells, bugs, animal, all either encased in amber or not encased in amber, which would either be green or orange. And because at this point I was trying to focus on, you know, imagining it in a GB Studio game, I did think about the simplicity of it and how easy it would be to create a card game. And looking back, if I did want to actually make this into a GB Studio game first, I would have tried to prototype this in GB Studio to see if it's even possible to make a card game. And I still haven't actually done that. And the main reason is I enjoyed playing this with my girlfriend and holding the cards in the hand and looking at the little pictures. I felt like it worked as a physical game. And this is why prototyping is useful, because if you solidify your idea before you've even tried it, you may find that the game isn't fun, or you might just go down a different path once you've actually tried it yourself. So at this point you can see I have the numbers. This is obviously on very cheap paper, right? It's just graph paper. And I just cut them out very, very tiny, not wasting too much time. The drawings are just stick figures basically. And then it's got my horrible handwriting that basically only I and my girlfriend can read. And I've tried to make a broad range of numbers from 1 to 10, and they each have different skills as well. So obviously you can fill an empty space, or you can cover a lower value. And I think I even have some in here that cover equal value. And I think as well, I started adding a couple here, because it's so quick and easy to make these tiny little cards. I started making cards that were special. For example, this one only covers higher value cards. And this one, when it covers cards, it basically lets you get all of the other cards underneath it back into the other player's hands and your hands as well. So I started to think about, you know, different ways you can actually make this into a real card game, now that I'd gone beyond the limitations of GB Studio, where I'd want to keep it very simple. So I started actually enjoying this creativity, and I kind of wanted to make them into real cards to try and experiment with that. I kind of wanted to branch out from just playing it with my girlfriend to playing it with some people who actually play board games. So I tried to write the rules, and obviously I tried to simplify it and try and boil it down to what it actually is. And obviously I was there to explain the rules as well, so it made it a lot easier. And I'll get to this bit in a minute. So as you can see, these cards are actually more full size-ish. I think it's like an eighth of a piece of paper. And these ones, you know, are written better, the image is kind of clearer, and obviously these numbers specifically are a lot clearer, so that I can actually play it with someone outside of my normal realm. And again, they were very easy to make. It's just folded up card, cut, you know, into this shape, and then drawn and written on. And I basically had a spreadsheet that I took these values and I thought about them a bit more and cleaned them up, and then obviously made them into these cards. So at this point I was trying to get feedback on what actually was fun about the game, and you know, what made the game good, so I could lean into that a bit more. And I actually found that just playing one-on-one wasn't actually that fun. It needed some kind of tournament idea, right? So this is where this comes in, where I started to think about, you know, having 3 rounds and then switching hands. And then as well, if you get a diagonal, it's 3 points. If you get a horizontal through the middle or a vertical through the middle, you get 2 points. And then if you don't go through the middle, you only get 1 point. And our draw is obviously 0. So I introduced the idea of points and a tournament where each round scales up the value that you're playing with. So each of these cards has a deck cost, which isn't always the same as its face value. And the idea is that, you know, you'll be creating your deck before starting and then going into the game, and then like playing 1 round and then upping the deck cost, and like kind of thinking about how your opponent played and then evolving your playstyle to that. So as you can see, it kind of has gone beyond the actual, beyond the digital completely now. But at the same time, I am still thinking about how it could be put into GB Studio. So I was thinking, if you are collecting cards, when you come across different players in the open world, then you'll be going up to them and, you know, playing your deck, and then they will have a specific play style, and you have to think about how your play style can beat them, right? So you have to think about which cards you're going to play into your deck. And obviously I still haven't prototyped it, and I don't know how I would actually do the card-based combat, so to say. So I'm more enjoying just making the cards and thinking about how the game will be played. As well as while I'm doing this, I have made a board game before. I didn't think it was professional enough to you know, release to the world, although it is, you know, on the Game Crafter, and if you did enough search you can probably find it. I don't recommend buying it. It does need some reworks. But I was then thinking about how I would get this game onto the Game Crafter, and so I started thinking about, you know, economy and how much would this actually cost. So I was thinking about, you know, scaling down the deck size in order to have less cards and make it more, you know, inviting to new players. I was also thinking about adding booster packs, you know, where you can buy a foil pack which then has random cards in, and would let the, you know, different players have different decks, and would really increase the amount you have to think about creating your deck before playing. So because of that, I decided to shrink the deck down to 36 cards, 4 cards being reserved for things like, you know, the center card, where this actually idea came up by the Game Crafter, where instead of having to buy a board where you have, you know, the cross like in the book, instead you start obviously with just a simple center card, and then you know that's the center, and you can play diagonally or horizontally or vertically around it. So one of them would be reserved for this, 2 would be reserved for the actual rules, and 1 card would be reserved for, you know, the rounds and the point system, and that would leave 16 cards for each hand, and that is exactly where we are today. So I have remade these cards, and I've tried to put more actual thought into the cards themselves. So for example, when I played it, so one person gave me the feedback of, you know, it isn't very readable, or maybe we could use icons to quickly look at this card and know what its power is, especially with long things like this. And that I was trying to think of a way to do that before. In here we have sketches and stuff, and this is where I was thinking about, the card design and, what could be in Amber and the story ideas. And like you see here, we have icons for lower value, equal value, higher value. But I didn't feel like it actually told you what it meant. And I know that in a lot of card games like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, it just has text. Maybe there are icons to help you with certain things, but the general, like actual rules of what the card does is written out in plain English so that you can easily understand how it's supposed to be used. Instead of using icons, I instead thought about the actual artwork. So, for example, in, Pokemon, there's trainers, and obviously the artwork for a trainer is a trainer. So I tried to think about what would be what. So, for example, let's go into this deck. We see here it's a basil, and it's a leaf. It's basically a leaf, right? So only cover lower value. So the idea is that a leaf would cover something, so therefore it only covers the lower value. And you see there's another leaf, so it's consistent. And flowers can fill empty spaces or lower values because they're like flowers, but also they grow from seeds. So seeds only fill empty space. And so hopefully this logic would eventually translate to the actual gameplay once you've got familiar. I guess if it was in the rules, it would make it a lot easier to get. And as long as I made sure that the artwork was very consistent, this would be 100% possible. And obviously insects and things cover lower value or equal value. And then shells only cover equal value. And there's another seed that fills an empty space, another flower. And obviously, the longer the text, the harder it is to make something that actually does what you would think it does. But the simplicity of for example, the shell should be universal, right? It's a bit harder with the other ones because a lot of things aren't actually found in Amber, because obviously it's prehistoric things. I tried to make things like a ring where it's meant to view the other player's hand, and therefore we have a ring as if you're wearing on your hand, right? So I tried to mix in things that you might know from the real world to make it make a bit more sense. And things like that ring especially has come from the process of me researching other card games. So I was looking at, for example, Magic the Gathering, where they often have combos, and there's a classic card from the first edition where it's like a Black Lotus or something, where when you play it, you can play another card or something, and you can basically empty your hand. But yeah, I was thinking about how we could use combos or things. I think I do have a couple in the other deck, but this one, for example, is if covered, return to your hand. And so because it's a value of 1, you just put it down, it gets covered, you take it back, and you can use it in a different spot, right? It actually gives this card personality. And you only really find this from playing, right? If obviously you can imagine all of these numbers and make spreadsheets like I do, but until you put it onto a card, you play the card, and you do what it says, and you get the emotional response to it, you don't know how it's going to feel. And some of these cards are very bad because they actually have a negative feel. Their cost is too high and they're almost useless. But this one especially is my favorite right now because of its, it has that emotional thing, and it feels like a bee coming back to you. It's quite nice. Yeah, so all of this is basically to say that when you're prototyping a game, there is no right way to do it, and you need to let yourself experiment and grow rather than just saying this is the game design I'm going for and then creating it. There are obviously times where that is necessary. For example, in a game jam, you might have to do that. You might have to have an idea and then just play it out, right? But let's say after the game jam, you would want to reflect on what went right, what didn't go right, and then improve on it. And obviously I have a lot of games where I haven't touched it after the game jam, but I have been thinking about them and thinking about people's feedback, and then maybe thinking about how to make it either a sequel or just go back and fix the game. So yeah, I hope this has inspired you slightly. I hope that you're thinking about how games don't have to just be digital, and especially if working in GB Studio, that could just be the springboard to work with something else. Especially a board game design is quite similar. And I actually may prefer board game design because multiplayer is inherently built into most games. It's very easy to make a multiplayer game, while obviously in GB Studio, it's technically difficult, like technically with the limitations of the hardware, right? So yeah, I hope this has given you something to think about. I'll put my patrons up on screen right now. Thank you so much to you guys. Remember to like the video if you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment on what you thought of this one. I know it's very different than usual. And let me know if you like the sound of this game. I would love to actually publish it and have people play it. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.